because particularly when you're beginning your career, you don't know much that more experienced people take for granted. Like, how do you get along with people? How do you know when you're not irritating somebody when you're trying to get help from them?
Yeah.
How do you read the boss's emotions to get a sense informally about what's going on, what the priorities are? The gossip that helps you understand why somebody got fired that you're never going to see in a memo, right? You only learn that stuff if you're there face to face, right?
Right.
And it's important to remind ourselves everybody who is saying how wonderful it is to be hybrid are people who began their careers not hybrid, right? They began their careers in offices where they learned all this stuff. I'm not in an office now, right?
Welcome to The Ripple Effect, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the minds of Wharton faculty. I'm your host, Dan Loney, and in each episode, we'll be diving deep into the inspiration behind the groundbreaking research that Wharton professors have conducted and exploring how their findings resonate with the world today.
Well, certainly the pandemic changed the way that many of us think about work. We were able to be successful in our jobs working from home. But as we move farther away from the days of the pandemic, more jobs seem to have a hybrid component in them. 3 to 4 days a week in the office and maybe 1 to 2 days a week working from home. But there are issues that pop up when you look at hybrid or remote work. Peter Cappelli is a professor of management here at the Wharton School, as well as director of the Center for Human Resources. He's also co-author of a new book titled In Praise of the Office, The Limits of Hybrid and Remote Work, and he joins us right now to discuss the new book. Peter, great to talk to you. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Dan. Thank you.
Take us through, I guess, let's start out with the importance of doing a book like this, especially right now.
Yeah, I think there's a practical reason and there's a bigger reason. The practical reason, I think, is lots of employers, and by the way, employers, in case we haven't noticed, have all the marbles here. They control everything about how we're going to work. And I think that employers have, many of them did not want to stay remote or hybrid. They wanted to come back and they expected to. But the problem is they never quite told anybody that. And surprisingly, in 2022, surveys of employees said they understood why they would have to come back to the office. 88%, it was a huge proportion. But if you wait 5 years, then people start to get a little irritated if you ask them to come back. So part of it is employers now, I think, are rethinking whether they wanted to keep this arrangement, which they never often really stamped and approved, partly because they're seeing productivity issues, and partly because in hybrid places, I think what's really irritating, so they can't see, performance so clearly, is attendance. They're just finding nobody's coming in. So I think that's the practical issue. There's a conceptual issue that concerns me more generally, and we've talked about this at least once before, and that is I think there's been this drift over time toward management of employees being worse and worse and worse and worse, and just cutting. We're seeing this on lots of things now. But there's a kind of belief that is growing in influence that you really don't have to manage people. They don't have to be together. They don't have to be in an office. You don't have to do anything for them, really. Just tell them what you want them to do, and if they don't do it, fire them. And there's 100 years of research showing that's not true, but lots of people want to believe it, and so that's another reason for doing this book.
What has been lost then by not having employees in the office 5 days a week? That inter-office connection obviously is probably part of this.
Yeah. Well, I think it's not clear you'd lose anything with 4.5 days
Right.
in the office.
Right.
But human contact and connection matters, and we've known this for 100 years of research. Some of it is we're engaged and we're committed to the people we work with, not the logo on the building, especially now because those just flip all the time. So it matters for those reasons. We also learn a lot from each other. If we have a good workplace, help each other in various ways. We solve problems a lot faster. When we have conflicts, they don't escalate the way they can if you're doing it by email. So there's lots about the way work gets done in offices that maybe wasn't so clear to us before because we never separated office work from an office structure. But now we're trying to do office work without an office structure, and you can start to see how some of these problems are popping up.
What about something like career advancement? I mean, if somebody is out of the office a couple of days a week and maybe doesn't have as much of a connection to the office on a daily basis, might there be an issue there as well?
Yeah. So, there were about 25 years of serious research about remote work before the pandemic. And it was all about the circumstances you're describing. And that is, you got some people in the office and a few who are not in or not in very often. And the way hybrid is playing out, this is maybe more likely than we would think, even though we have anchor days, people aren't showing up for them. So if you're in the office, the prior evidence was overwhelming that you got ahead, and if you were not, you didn't. Everything was worse work-wise for you. You didn't get promoted as often, your wages were lower, your engagement was lower, your commitment was lower, your turnover was higher. So, if you have to choose and you are going to be the outlier at home when your colleagues are in the office, just expect it might be worth it for you, but your career is likely to take a hit.
What about for new employees? It seems like one of the stories we've heard a lot in the last few years is, kids coming out of college, going into the workforce, have developed this expectation that hybrid work is how they are going to work their career.
Yeah, they might think that. I always ask their parents, when you get a group of people in a room for executive education and other things, and many of them are big fans of hybrid, but I ask them, if your kid had a choice of going into the office or working remotely, what would you tell them? And virtually everybody says you should go to the office, right?
Yep.
Because particularly when you're beginning your career, you don't know much that more experienced people take for granted. Like, how do you get along with people? How do you know when you're not irritating somebody when you're trying to get help from them?
Yeah.
How do you read the boss's emotions to get a sense informally about what's going on, what the priorities are? The gossip that helps you understand why somebody got fired that you're never going to see in a memo, right? You only learn that stuff if you're there face to face, right?
Right.
And it's important to remind ourselves, everybody who is saying how wonderful it is to be hybrid are people who began their careers not hybrid, right? They began their careers in offices where they learned all this stuff. I'm not in an office now, right?
Right.
And I've been at Wharton for 40 years. I got a pretty good idea how the place works. Doesn't hurt me that much. It probably does hurt my junior colleagues that I'm not there more often. I should confess I'm on sabbatical now, so I'm not required to be in the office, but that's a big issue, a generational divide. Senior people don't want to be there. They don't need to, but junior people need them there.
Well, and this goes a little bit to another topic that you and I have talked about on a variety of occasions, is that of workplace culture and how valued that component has become for the office, not even, after the pandemic or during it, but before that, it was starting to really gain in value in terms of having a successful office. Partly was because you had to have a great culture.
Yeah, I think for sure employers at the top have recognized that's something they're supposed to do, is build the culture. When we say culture, we really mean what are the rules unstated that tell you how you're supposed to behave and what's important. And you learn those rules by watching, right? Seeing who gets rewarded for what, who gets in trouble for what do the senior people do, what do they seem to value. And it's not the sheet of paper that comes around and says, this is our culture, right? Those things are all aspirational.
Right.
And they all kind of say the same thing. But it does matter if people understand the same unwritten rules about how things are supposed to work. And you can't learn that if you are remote, at least not now, the way things are operating now.
But we do occasionally see companies calling back employees full time. Is the expectation that it's going to continue that way, kind of in dribs and drabs, that firms will kind of reach some kind of boiling point or some, component, and they feel like they need to bring employees back full time?
Well, there's a stunning survey done by KPMG this year where they say that they've surveyed C-suite people, and that 83%, I think, say they expect everybody to be back in the office within 3 years.
Oh,
Are they right about that? I don't know. These forecasts are rarely very accurate. But for sure, there doesn't seem to be any uptick in push to get people out of the office. And by the way, for people who think this is all just about cynical managers, if they were really cynical and just cynical and cost conscious, it's way cheaper to not have an office, right?
right.
It's way cheaper to just push everybody out and send them home and try to get things done because you save all that office space overhead costs, right? And the fact that they're not doing that means they must see some kind of value.
But are there scenarios where hybrid is maybe the best option for an individual employee?
Well, for sure, for employees, I mean, this is why this is so politically charged, right? For employees, many of them have built lives around hybrid work arrangements.
Right.
Unfortunately, they've also built lives around the lack of enforcement of hybrid arrangements. Like you have anchor days, but nobody's expecting you to be there and nobody's enforcing them, right?
Right.
And then you adapt to that. And then, of course, you're all irritated when the companies do start enforcing those rules. But you could get a lot, I mean, this is mainly what our book is about. You could get a lot of the advantages of in person and not have everybody there 4 days a week or 5 days a week. But you have to be a lot more purposeful about it. If employees are only there 2 days a week, and by the way, it's not going to be the same employees all the time now
Right.
because companies have shrunk their office space. They can't even get everybody back anymore, right, at once. So if that's the case and I'm a new employee, it's going to take me a long time to figure out even what my peers and bosses are kind of like as people. And that all has a cost, right?
Yeah.
You could speed that up, but you have to be purposeful about it. You could speed up social interactions, but you have to be purposeful about it. And so far, the problem, and one of the motivations for this book, is that we haven't been purposeful. We've basically just sort of assumed that people who are in remote and hybrid are really just the same as they were in the office, and it's not.
How do you think then do you expect to see this play out over the next several years ahead? Where does this when we revisit this in a decade? Where are we looking?
Yeah, I try not to make predictions because I'm rarely very good at them. One thing which is quirky, though, about we have an equilibrium, that view, which we hear a lot, just the equilibrium keeps changing, right?
Right.
Is that employers, and particularly human resource people, you see this a lot, really, really want to fit in with what everybody else is doing. And right now, quite unusually, we have just a big variety of practices across organizations. Is that going to be stable? Are employers going to grow used to the fact that what they're doing is not what everybody else is doing? And I don't think so, right? So if you saw after Amazon announced at the beginning of this year they were bringing everybody back, there was suddenly an uptick of other big companies doing the same thing, right? When Jamie Dimon announced that not only are they bringing everybody back, but they're building a new building sort of suited to everybody being in the office, ears perked up around Wall Street, and that started to shift there too. So I don't think it's going to be stable, but I also don't think that by next year everybody's going to be back in the office either. I think it'll be a years-long change exercise.
So then when a new employee gets an offer and it includes a hybrid component, how do you think they should view the offer and how they should view going into that job?
Yeah.
Because I think you and I both, I think, feel that, the value of being in the office, if it's 4 days a week, if it's 5 days a week, is really valuable, especially for a new employee.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I would say is to some extent, nobody will prevent you from being there more
Right.
than
Exactly.
anchor
Right.
days, right?
Right.
But if you've got an organization with, say, it's hybrid, but it's only 2 days a week, and you ask them, how does that determined? Well, every local manager gets to decide, which is often the case. I would, other things equal, not go. And the reason is because even if you're going to go in, people are not going to be there, right?
Yeah.
And you won't get the benefits of being there, right? So, I would say when you're beginning your career, you need to meet people, you need to learn, and you're going to learn by watching and asking questions. That's really hard to do if it's not face-to-face. So if you think it's not going to work, even if you can go in, unless other people are there, it's not going to help you.
How do you hope that this book resonates in the workplace moving forward?
Well, I hope what would happen is that employers take this more seriously. That is the question, but also, okay, we want to be hybrid. How can we do it better? And will they be willing to do that? I don't know. To be honest, I'm not the most optimistic person, but it requires effort and time from the senior people in the companies. And I guess the trend I've been seeing over the recent years is that they're less and less interested in hands-on management and more interested in being the kind of outside boss who's cutting deals, who's doing M&As, who's working on finance, and the inside of the organization doesn't have a lot of direction. So, and this will take a lot of direction to make this better. Now, maybe there's a way to delegate that.
Right.
If you have a chief operating officer, for example, maybe there's a way to delegate that. It's not going to, by the way, human resource people do not volunteer for this job, because if they give it to you, you don't have the power to execute it. You're just going to end up looking bad. So, it can't be delegated to lower level people. It can't be delegated to people who don't have power. And it's not going to work if you let each little group decide what they're going to do. You're quickly going to get a race to the bottom because nobody wants to be the bad guy telling their employees they're the ones who have to come in.
Peter, always great to talk with you. Congratulations on the book, and look forward to chatting again.
Thank you, Dan, and happy birthday.
Thank you very much. And the book is titled In Praise of the Office, The Limits of Hybrid and Remote Work. Peter Cappelli, our guest, is the one of the authors, professor of management here at the Wharton School and director of the Center for Human Resources.
Thank you for listening to The Ripple Effect. We hope you found this episode informative and engaging. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review so that we can continue to bring you the best insight from the Wharton School.